Hello everyone, my name is Robert Dalby, and today I will be presenting on animals are not the best use of tests for scientific needs. So my first topic of discussion is animals are very different from humans and therefore make poor test subjects. The anatomic, which is just the anatomy, structure of the organs inside the organism, and the metabolic, which is just the metabolism, the ability for the conversion of food to energy to run the cellular process. Differences make animals poor models for humans. Paul Furlong, professor of clinical neuroimaging at Ashton University, states it's very hard to create an animal model that even equates closely to what we're trying to achieve in the human. Thomas Hartung, professor of evidence-based toxicology at Johns Hopkins, argues for alternative testing because the human organism itself is one of the most complex, and we cannot be taking a risk on rats hoping for everything to turn out normal. So a couple noticeable differences, just small facts on the topic itself. The cardiovascular system, which is just your heart and the blood vessels running through your body. The human heart has 4 large chambers called the atrium and the ventricles. A lot of scientific test subjects only have 2 chambers. Rabbits are used a lot in experiments, and especially for their reaction to scent. But humans are very different when it comes to the smell and sinuses. For example, a major part of the human sinus system is the etheriomedial sinus, which is located on the outer part of your nose, and the frontal sinuses, which is located on the front of your forehead, which neither of these sinuses are located in the rabbit sinus system. My second point, animal tests are more expensive than alternative methods. A biotechnology company in Prepio invented synthetic livers, which can predict the liver's metabolic reaction, which once again is just your metabolism, reactions to drugs in the process that is quicker, cheaper, and more accurate than animal testing. Over the last couple of years, $56.4 million of government funds were spent on animal experiments, despite running over many years and failed to provide many accurate results. That was brought up by the National Advancing Science Program. My last point here, drugs that pass animal tests are not necessarily safe for the humans in the long run. FDA reports 92% of drugs from animal testing fail to receive approval for human use. So that goes back to your $56.4 million, and only 8% of that technically goes to good use. So take that for what it is. And Science Direct states TGN 1412 was a drug meant to work by controlling the white human blood cells. TGN 1412 was tested in mice, rabbits, rats, and monkeys with no ill effects. 6 human volunteers were injected with the serum. Within minutes, the human test subjects were writhing on the floor in agony and pain, and it had supercharged the immune system, unleashing a cascade of chemicals that sent all 6 volunteers to the hospital. All suffered permanent organ damage. This is just an example of how these the drugs that go through the animal system are safe to them, but when they come to humans, they're technically not safe. So for conclusion, for my subject is animals are very different from humans and therefore make poor test subject with their organs and organisms. Animal tests are more expensive than alternative methods, and drugs that pass animal tests are not necessarily safe. Thank you.
All right, well, the phrasing of the proposition has that negative concept in it. That's a little bit problematic. There's not really a preview of what the supporting structure is going to be at the beginning of the speech, although you did signpost them in the body of the presentation. I think a lot of people will probably have some familiarity with the controversy on the subject, although I think you could maybe give us a little bit more background on that so we know why it is that we need to make this particular argument. The criticism on the first point that animals are different, you've got a nice example of the cardiovascular system that illustrates that. How significant the 4-chamber heart versus the 2-chamber heart is in doing some kinds of research might be explained a little bit more. It doesn't, I don't know necessarily that the animals with the 2-chamber hearts would be the subjects of experimentation or testing for medications that are necessarily designed for humans or animals that with 4-chamber hearts. So it's, it is a difference. I understand that. Has that difference had any impact on the research that's been done? There's not really any information that is specific about that. And it's interesting that rabbits have different sinus systems. How that affects the legitimacy of any of the research that's being done needs to be explained. You've pointed out some differences between animals and human subjects, which is a good start, but show us that those differences are going to matter and that they have an impact on the comparison. I think we need a little bit more information on that point. The argument that there are alternatives available that are cheaper, well, you did talk about the one thing that illustrated this with a kind of synthetic liver, and there's an example there, but that's the only information that you have on that subject. So if the tests involve anything other than the effect on the liver, I'm not sure that you've managed to convince me that there are alternatives available on those particular issues. The amount of money that gets spent on it is, it's a piece of factual data. I'm not exactly sure how that it indicates that something is worthwhile or not worthwhile. That it works or it doesn't work, it just explains how much we're spending on it. So I'm not sure that that gets you much in the long run. The evidence that talks about a lot of medications that get approved by that go through animal screening and then don't get approved for human use, I think that that's generally a good piece of information suggesting that animal models are potentially unreliable. It's interesting that you do point out that ultimately it's a process that they go through, so there's testing on different kinds of animals first, and then when that succeeds, then they test on a different kind of animal, and then when that succeeds, then they test on human subjects, and that's the example that you finish with, where the human subjects ended up having severe problems, despite the fact that animals didn't have those problems. The question would be, would those alternatives, for instance, have screened that out? Like the synthetic liver, would that have been able to tell us, that this would have been dangerous for humans, and the reason it wasn't dangerous for animals is because of those differences. I think that's the kind of thing that would make that argument a lot more convincing. I don't know that you're going to find information that shows that, but that's kind of the way it goes in that direction. All right, and at the end of the speech, you do a little bit of, what do they call it? Retconning, where you basically do create an organizational structure looking back at the things that you talked about, and that helps a little bit with the structural things that were problematic at the beginning, clear in the body of the speech, and then get one more chance at clarity at the exit of the speech. I think that helps a little bit too. All right, thank you.